Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. The gentle strum of my guitar filled the air as I sat on the porch of my modest Maplewood home. The familiar weight of the instrument in my hands brought a smile to my face. This town, with its tree-lined streets and friendly faces, had always been my haven. As I plucked out a new melody, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the life I'd built here. Jimmy, there you are, Laura's voice carried from inside the house. My wife appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair neatly styled and her clothes immaculate as always. I thought we agreed you'd help me with the planning for the summer festival today. I set my guitar aside and stood up. Sorry, darling. Got caught up in a new song idea. You know how it is. Laura's lips tightened slightly. I do know. But this festival is important for my career, Jimmy. If I can pull this off, it could lead to bigger opportunities. I walked over and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. I know, and I'm proud of you. Let's get to work on those plans. As we settled at the kitchen table, surrounded by Laura's meticulously organized binders and color-coded sticky notes, I couldn't help but notice the slight furrow in her brow. It was a look I'd been seeing more often lately. So, what's first on the agenda? I asked, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. Laura's eyes lit up as she launched into her plans. Well, I was thinking we could transform the town square into a mini carnival. We'll have food stalls, games, and of course, a main stage for performances. That's where you come in. I nodded, already picturing the scene. Sounds great. The band and I could put together a set list that'll keep everyone dancing all night. That's what I'm counting on, Laura said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Your music is always the highlight of these events. We spent the next hour going over details, from vendor placements to schedule logistics. As Laura rattled off her ideas, I found my mind wandering. I loved seeing her passion for event planning, but lately, it felt like there was an undercurrent of restlessness in her voice. Jimmy, are you even listening? Laura's sharp tone snapped me back to attention. Of course I am, I said quickly, just thinking about how to arrange the band for maximum crowd interaction. Laura sighed, closing her binder. I sometimes wonder if you're as invested in this as I am. This festival could be our ticket to bigger things, you know? Maybe even a chance to move to a larger city where there are more opportunities. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Laura, we've talked about this. Maplewood is our home. The people here, they're like family. Why would we want to leave all this behind? Because there's a whole world out there, Jimmy. Laura's voice rose slightly. Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to play for larger crowds? To see your name in lights? I reached across the table and took her hand. Honey, I'm happy right here. The crowds might be smaller, but the love is just as big. Besides, we've got everything we need right here in Maplewood. Laura pulled her hand away and stood up. Maybe that's enough for you, but I can't help feeling like there's more out there for us. For me, as she left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that a chasm was slowly growing between us. I loved Laura with all my heart, but her dreams seemed to be taking her in a direction I wasn't sure I wanted to follow. The rest of the day passed in a blur of rehearsals with my band and a quick meetup with my best friend, Sam Carter. As the sun began to set, I found myself walking towards the town hall, guitar case in hand. I had a standing appointment to play for the town council's weekly meeting, a tradition that had started years ago when Franklin Marsh, Laura's father, had first invited me to liven things up a bit. As I approached the building, I saw Franklin standing outside, deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and well-dressed, with slicked back hair and an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Franklin spotted me and waved me over. Jimmy, my boy. Right on time as always. I'd like you to meet Nick Harding. He's new in town, thinking of setting up a business here. I shifted my guitar case to my left hand and extended my right to Nick. His grip was firm, almost uncomfortably so. Welcome to Maplewood, Nick. What kind of business are you looking into? Nick's smile widened. Oh, a little of this, a little of that. I like to keep my options open. I've heard a lot about you, Jimmy. The town's golden boy, aren't you? There was something in his tone that set me on edge, but I brushed it off with a laugh. I don't know about that. I just play my music and try to bring a little joy to folks around here. Franklin clapped me on the shoulder. And you do a damn fine job of it, son. Now, why don't you head on in and set up? We'll be starting soon. As I walked into the town hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Nick Harding's arrival in Maplewood felt like a pebble dropped in a still pond, small, but with ripples that could spread far and wide. Little did I know, those ripples were about to turn into waves that would threaten to wash away everything I held dear. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as I fumbled with the coffee maker. Laura had already left for an early meeting about the summer festival, leaving the house unusually quiet. I yawned, still groggy from a late-night gig at the Rusty Nail. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I decided to grab the mail. Opening the front door, I nearly tripped over a small envelope on the welcome mat. No stamp, no return address, just my name scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. Back in the kitchen, I tore open the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The message was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. Your wife is hiding something. Open your eyes before it's too late. I read it again, my hands shaking slightly. What could this mean? Who would send such a cryptic warning? The coffee maker beeped, startling me out of my thoughts. I poured a cup, barely tasting it as I tried to make sense of the note. Laura and I had our issues lately. Sure, but hiding something? It didn't add up. I needed to talk to someone, to get another perspective. Maggie would know what to make of this. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. Jimmy? What's up? It's not even noon yet. Maggie's sleepy voice came through the speaker. Sorry to wake you, Mags. Can you meet me at Dottie's Diner in about an hour? There's something I need to show you. There was a pause on the other end. You okay? You sound rattled. I sighed. I'm not sure. I'll explain everything when I see you. All right, I'll be there. You're buying the pancakes, though? I managed a weak chuckle. Deal. An hour later, I slid into a booth at Dottie's, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. Maggie arrived a few minutes later, her curly hair messier than usual. Okay, spill, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. What's got you all worked up? I pulled out the note and handed it to her. Maggie's eyes widened as she read it. Holy shit, Jimmy. Where did this come from? Found it on my doorstep this morning. No idea who left it. Maggie studied the note again. And you have no clue what it might be referring to? I shook my head. None. I mean, Laura's been a bit distant lately, always talking about moving to a bigger city, but hiding something? I can't imagine what it could be. Have you noticed anything unusual? Changes in her routine? New friends? Anything like that? I thought for a moment. Well, she has been going out more often in the evenings. Says it's for work, meeting potential clients and vendors for her events. Maggie raised an eyebrow. And you're sure that's what she's doing? Of course, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, a seed of doubt took root. I mean, why wouldn't she be? Look, Jimmy, I'm not saying there's definitely something going on, but this note, combined with Laura's recent behavior, it might be worth keeping an eye out. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration building. What are you suggesting? That I spy on my own wife? Maggie leaned forward, her voice low. Not spy, exactly. Just pay attention. Notice if anything seems off. Has she been protective of her phone lately? Working late more often? Little things like that. The waitress interrupted, bringing our food. As we ate, I mulled over Maggie's words. The idea of doubting Laura made me sick to my stomach, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. There's something else, I said, pushing my half-eaten pancakes away. Remember that guy I told you about? Nick Harding? Maggie nodded. The new guy in town, right? What about him? I've seen him around a lot lately. At the grocery store, the park, even outside the town hall. It's like he's everywhere. And I don't know. There's just something about him that rubs me the wrong way. The way he looks at people, like he's sizing them up. And the other day, I could have sworn I saw him talking to Laura outside her office. Maggie's eyes narrowed. Did you ask her about it? I shook my head. No, I guess I didn't want to seem paranoid. Jimmy, Maggie said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You're not paranoid. You're concerned. And given this note, I think you have a right to be. Why don't we do a little digging? See if we can find out more about this Nick character. I hesitated, torn between my trust in Laura and the gnawing doubt that had taken hold. Finally, I nodded. Okay, but we do this discreetly. No wild accusations, no confrontations. We just observe. Deal? Maggie smiled, a determined glint in her eye. Deal. Operation Open Eyes is officially underway. As we left the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that life in Maplewood was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The next few days passed in a blur of rehearsals, gigs, and increasingly paranoid observations. I hated myself for it, but I found myself watching Laura's every move, noting her late-night phone calls and the way she'd quickly close her laptop when I entered the room. Maggie, true to her word, had been keeping an eye on Nick Harding. She'd learned he was staying at the Pinewood Inn on the outskirts of town, an upscale place that seemed at odds with his claims of just passing through. It was a Tuesday night when everything came to a head. Laura had told me she had a late meeting with a potential client for the summer festival, but something in her voice, a slight tremor I'd never noticed before, set off alarm bells in my head. I called Maggie as soon as Laura left the house. "I think something's going down tonight," I said, pacing our living room. Laura just left for a meeting, but she seemed off. "Where's she headed?" Maggie asked, her voice tense. "She didn't say, but I've got a hunch. Can you meet me at the Pinewood Inn in 20 minutes? I'll be there in 15. The drive to the inn was the longest of my life. Every traffic light seemed to last an eternity, every slow driver a personal affront. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. Maggie was already there, leaning against her beat-up Volkswagen. "Took you long enough," she said, but her attempt at humor fell flat. "Her car's here," I said, nodding towards Laura's sleek sedan parked near the entrance. "And look who else decided to show up." Maggie followed my gaze to a flashy sports car pulling into a spot near Laura's. Nick Harding stepped out, adjusting his tie as he strode towards the inn's entrance. "Shit," Maggie muttered. "Jimmy, maybe we should." But I was already moving, my feet carrying me towards the building before my brain could catch up. Maggie hurried after me, hissing warnings I couldn't or wouldn't hear. The lobby was deserted except for a bored-looking receptionist. I approached the desk, forcing a smile. "Evening. I'm looking for my wife, Laura Marshall. She said she had a meeting here tonight." The receptionist tapped at her computer. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any meeting rooms booked for tonight." My stomach dropped. "What about Nick Harding? He's staying here, right?" She hesitated, clearly torn between guest privacy and my desperate expression. I can't give out guest information, sir." "Please," I said, leaning in. "It's important. I think my wife might be in trouble." Something in my voice must have convinced her. She glanced around, then whispered, "Room 237. I was halfway to the elevator before she finished speaking, Maggie hot on my heels. "Jimmy, wait," she called as the doors slid shut. "Think about what you're doing." But I couldn't think. I could only feel a roiling mix of anger, fear, and betrayal that threatened to consume me. The elevator dinged, and I burst out onto the second floor. Room 237 was at the end of the hall. As we approached, I could hear muffled voices from inside. "Jimmy," Maggie pleaded one last time, "are you sure you want to do this?" I met her eyes, seeing my own pain reflected there. Then, without a word, I turned and kicked the door with all my might. The lock gave way with a splintering crack, and I stumbled into the room. The scene before me was worse than I could have imagined. Laura, my wife, the woman I'd loved for over a decade, was tangled in the sheets with Nick Harding. They both looked up, startled by the intrusion. Laura's face drained of color. "Jimmy!" she gasped, scrambling to cover herself. "Oh God, Jimmy. This is not happening. Listen, Jimmy." But I couldn't hear her over the roaring in my ears. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint, focused entirely on Nick's smug face. "Well, well," he drawled, sitting up lazily. "Looks like the town's golden boy isn't so perfect after all. Can't even keep his own wife satisfied." Something inside me snapped. With a roar of rage, I launched myself at Nick, my fist connecting with his jaw. We tumbled to the floor, trading blows as Laura screamed for us to stop. I was vaguely aware of Maggie trying to pull me off, of Laura sobbing in the background. But all I could focus on was the satisfying crunch of my knuckles against Nick's face. Finally, Maggie and one of the hotel security guards managed to separate us. I stood there, panting, my lips split and my knuckles bloodied. "Jimmy," Laura whimpered, reaching for me. I jerked away from her touch. "Don't," I spat. "Don't you dare touch me. We're done, Laura. Do you hear me? Done." I turned to Nick, who was being helped to his feet by the security guard. "And you," I growled. "You'd better watch your back. This isn't over." With that, I stormed out of the room, ignoring Laura's pleas and Maggie's concerned calls. I made it to my truck before the adrenaline wore off, leaving me shaking and nauseous. As I sat there, staring at my bloodied hands on the steering wheel, I felt something inside me harden. The Jimmy Marshall who had walked into that hotel trusting, optimistic, maybe a little naive was gone. In his place was a man with only one thought: revenge. I started the engine, my mind already racing with plans. Laura and Nick had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out just how dangerous a man with nothing left to lose could be. As I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the shattered remains of my marriage behind, I made a silent vow. I would make them pay, both of them, and Maplewood would never be the same again. The morning after the hotel incident, I woke up on Maggie's couch with a pounding headache and a heart full of rage. The events of the previous night played on repeat in my mind, each replay stoking the fire of my anger. Maggie emerged from her bedroom, looking as rough as I felt. "How you holding up, Jimmy?" I sat up, wincing at the pain in my bruised knuckles. "I've been better. Got any coffee?" She nodded and headed to the kitchen. I followed, collapsing into a chair at her small table. "So," Maggie said, setting a steaming mug in front of me, "what's the plan?" I took a sip, letting the bitter liquid clear my head. "I'm going to destroy them, Mags. Both of them." Maggie's eyes widened. "Jimmy, I know you're hurting, but—" "No buts," I cut her off. "They humiliated me, made a fool of me in front of the whole town. I'm not letting them get away with it." She sighed, running a hand through her messy curls. "Okay, I get it. But how exactly do you plan on destroying them?" A grim smile spread across my face. "I've got a few ideas. First things first, though. I need to talk to Sam." An hour later, I was sitting across from Sam Carter in his patrol car, parked behind the Maplewood police station. Sam's face was a mix of shock and sympathy as I recounted the events of the previous night. "Jesus, Jimmy," he breathed. "I can't believe Laura would do that to you. And with that slick bastard Harding, of all people." I nodded, my jaw clenched. "Yeah, well, believe it. Now I need your help, Sam. I need dirt on Harding. Anything you can dig up?" Sam hesitated. "Jimmy, you know I can't just access police records for personal vendettas." "Come on, Sam," I pleaded. "We've been friends since kindergarten. I'm not asking you to break the law. Just bend it a little. For me." He sighed, rubbing his face. All right. I'll see what I can find. But Jimmy, promise me you won't do anything stupid." I forced a smile. "Would I ever?" Sam just shook his head, a worried look in his eyes. Over the next few days, I put my plan into motion. It started small, a whispered comment here, a pointed question there. I'd run into Rebecca Johnson, Laura's best friend, at the grocery store. "Hey, Rebecca," I called out, my voice carefully controlled. "How's Laura doing? I heard she's been spending a lot of time with that new guy in town. Nick, right?" Rebecca's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Jimmy? I thought she was working late on the festival plans." I shrugged, feigning innocence. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Just thought I saw them together a few times. Probably work-related." As I walked away, I could practically hear the gears turning in Rebecca's head. The seed of doubt was planted. Next, I cornered Nick at the Rusty Nail during my gig. During our break, I approached him at the bar, my bandmates watching nervously from across the room. "Nick," I said, clapping him on the shoulder hard enough to make him wince. "Just the man I wanted to see." He turned, his face a mask of cool indifference. "Jimmy, what can I do for you?" I leaned in close, my voice low. You can start by telling me about your time in Millbrook. Heard some interesting stories about your business dealings there. For a split second, Nick's composure slipped. Fear flashed in his eyes before he regained control. I don't know what you're talking about, Marshall. Now, if you'll excuse me. He tried to push past me, but I grabbed his arm. Oh, I think you do. And trust me, this is just the beginning. I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who you are. Nick yanked his arm free, his face flushed with anger. You're playing a dangerous game, Jimmy. I'd watch your step if I were you. I just smiled, a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. Game on, Nick. Game on. As the days passed, I could see the effects of my campaign. People whispered when Nick walked by. Laura's calls to plan the festival went unanswered more often than not. Even Franklin, Laura's father, started giving Nick wary looks at town council meetings. But it wasn't enough. I needed more ammunition, more proof of their deceit. That's when Sam came through for me. We met in the park, away from prying eyes and ears. Sam handed me a thick manila envelope, his face grim. Jimmy, are you sure about this? He asked. Once you open this can of worms, there's no going back. I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. I'm sure, Sam. They made their choice. Now they have to live with the consequences. As I walked away, clutching the envelope that held the key to Nick and Laura's downfall, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. The old Jimmy would have hesitated, would have questioned whether this was the right thing to do. But I wasn't that Jimmy anymore. That Jimmy died the moment he kicked down that hotel room door. This new Jimmy? He was out for blood. And Maplewood was about to become a battlefield. A week after receiving the envelope from Sam, I found myself standing outside Franklin Marsh's office at the town hall. My hand hovered over the doorknob, uncertainty gnawing at me for the first time since this all began. Franklin had always been like a second father to me. The thought of breaking his heart with the truth about his daughter made my stomach churn. But I steeled myself, remembering Laura's betrayal, and knocked on the door. Come in, Franklin's voice called out. I stepped into the office, taking in the familiar sight of Franklin behind his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and town memorabilia. His face lit up when he saw me, then quickly fell as he remembered the situation. Jimmy, my boy, he said, rising to greet me. I'm glad you came. Please, sit down. I took a seat across from him, the envelope heavy in my jacket pocket. Franklin settled back into his chair, his eyes filled with concern. Jimmy, he began, his voice gentle, I know things have been difficult lately. Laura told me about what happened at the hotel. I felt my jaw clench. Did she tell you everything, Franklin? About her affair with Nick? About how long it had been going on? Franklin winced. She told me enough. Jimmy, I'm not here to defend her actions. What she did was wrong, inexcusable even. But what? I asked, my voice harder than I intended. But she's still my daughter, Franklin said, his eyes pleading. And you're still the man I've always thought of as a son. I was hoping we could find a way to work through this. For the sake of family. I let out a bitter laugh. Family? Laura threw that away the moment she decided to cheat on me. And Nick? He's been playing this whole town for fools. Franklin leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What do you mean, Jimmy? What do you know about Nick? This was it, the moment of truth. I pulled out the envelope and placed it on Franklin's desk. Everything you need to know is in there, I said. Bank records, police reports, testimonies from his previous victims. Nick Harding is a con man, Franklin. He's done this before in other towns. Seduces wealthy women, convinces them to invest in his bogus business schemes, then disappears with their money. Franklin's face paled as he flipped through the documents. My God, he whispered. Laura, does she know about this? I shook my head. I don't think so. But she's not innocent in this, Franklin. She chose to betray me, to lie to everyone. Franklin looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. You're right, Jimmy. This changes everything. What do you plan to do with this information? I'm going to expose them, I said, my voice firm. Both of them. Nick for his crimes, and Laura for her part in all of this. The town deserves to know the truth. Franklin was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across his desk. Finally, he looked up at me, his face etched with resigned determination. "You're right," he said softly. "As much as it pains me to say it, you're right. The truth needs to come out." He paused, taking a deep breath. "What can I do to help?" I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Having Franklin's support meant more to me than I'd realized. "For now, just keep this between us. I'm still gathering evidence, building a case. When the time comes to go public, I'll let you know." Franklin nodded, then stood up and walked around the desk. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "Jimmy, I want you to know. I'm sorry. Sorry for what Laura did to you. Sorry for not seeing what was happening under my own nose. You deserved better." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thank you, Franklin. That means a lot." As I left Franklin's office, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Grief for the family I'd lost, anger at the betrayal, but also a renewed sense of purpose. With Franklin on my side, I was one step closer to bringing Laura and Nick down. But as I walked out of the town hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The real battle was yet to come, and it promised to be uglier than anything Maplewood had ever seen. The next morning, I met Maggie at the Maplewood Public Library. We'd agreed to dig deeper into Nick's past, hoping to uncover more evidence of his misdeeds. Maggie was already at a table in the back, surrounded by stacks of newspapers and a laptop. She looked up as I approached, her eyes bright with excitement. "Jimmy, you're not going to believe what I found," she said in a hushed voice. I slid into the chair across from her. "What is it?" Maggie turned her laptop towards me. On the screen was a news article from a small-town newspaper. The headline read, "Local businessman vanishes with investors' money." "That's Nick," I said, pointing to a grainy photo accompanying the article. "But it says his name is Nathan Harper." Maggie nodded. "Exactly. I think we've just scratched the surface of his con game. He changes his name in each town." I felt a surge of vindication. "This is perfect, Mags. But we need more. We need to build an airtight case." "Already on it," she replied. "I've got a friend, Detective Harris. He's retired now, but he still has connections. I think he could help us dig deeper." I raised an eyebrow. "You trust him?" Maggie nodded emphatically. "With my life. He's like an uncle to me. Plus, he loves a good mystery. I've already filled him in on the basics. He's waiting for us at his place." An hour later, we were sitting in Detective Harris's cluttered home office. The walls were covered in crime scene photos and newspaper clippings, a testament to his years on the force. Harris, a gruff man in his 60s with a shock of white hair, leaned back in his creaking chair. "So, you two think you've uncovered a serial con man, huh? Let's see what you've got." We laid out everything we had: the documents from Sam, the newspaper articles Maggie had found, my own observations of Nick's behavior. Harris listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When we finished, he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. You kids might be onto something here. But if we're going to nail this bastard, we need more. Concrete evidence, witnesses willing to testify. How do we get that?" I asked. Harris scratched his chin thoughtfully. "We start by tracing his steps. You said he's gone by different names. Let's compile a list of every alias we can find. Then we start reaching out to his previous victims. See if any of them are willing to come forward." Maggie leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with determination. "I can help with that. I'm good at research." Harris nodded approvingly. "Good. Jimmy, your job is to keep an eye on Nick here in Maplewood. Document everything he does, everyone he talks to. We need to build a picture of his current operation." I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since this whole mess began. "Consider it done. What about Laura? Should we confront her with what we know?" Harris shook his head firmly. "Not yet. If Laura's involved, even unknowingly, we don't want to tip our hand. For now, we gather evidence. When we have enough to make our case ironclad, then we move." We spent the next few hours outlining our plan of action. By the time we left Harris's house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Maplewood. As we walked to our cars, Maggie turned to me. "Jimmy, are you sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no turning back. It could get ugly. I paused, considering her words. The old Jimmy might have hesitated, might have looked for a way to resolve this peacefully. But that Jimmy was gone. I'm sure, Mags, I said, my voice firm. They made their choices. Now they have to face the consequences. Maggie nodded, a mix of concern and determination in her eyes. All right then, let's take these bastards down. As I drove home that night, my mind raced with plans and possibilities. We were on the verge of uncovering something big, something that could shake Maplewood to its core. Part of me felt a thrill at the prospect, but another part, a quieter part that sounded suspiciously like the old Jimmy, whispered a warning. Was I prepared for the fallout? For the pain this revelation would cause, not just to Laura and Nick, but to everyone in town who trusted them. I pushed the thought aside. It was too late for doubts now. The die was cast. The wheels were in motion. All that was left was to see it through to the bitter end. As I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that Maplewood was standing on the edge of a precipice, and I was the one about to push it over. The Maplewood town square bustled with activity as people gathered for what they thought was a routine town meeting. I stood off to the side, my heart pounding as I watched familiar faces file into the makeshift seating area. Maggie appeared at my elbow, her face etched with concern. "You ready for this, Jimmy?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, my jaw set. As ready as I'll ever be. "Is Detective Harris here?" "Just arrived," Maggie confirmed. "He's setting up the presentation now." I scanned the crowd, spotting Nick near the front, his usual smug smile in place. Laura sat a few rows behind him, looking nervous. Franklin stood at the podium, preparing to call the meeting to order. "All right, folks," Franklin's voice boomed out. "Let's get started. We have some unexpected business to discuss today." The crowd quieted, and Franklin's eyes met mine. He gave a slight nod, and I knew it was time. I made my way to the front, feeling every eye on me. "Thanks, Franklin," I said, taking the microphone. "Folks, I know you're all wondering why we called this meeting. Well, we've uncovered some information that affects everyone in Maplewood, and it's time you all knew the truth." Nick's smile faltered, and I saw Laura shift uncomfortably in her seat. "For the past few weeks, we've been investigating Nick Harding," I continued. "And what we've found is, well, it's not good." Detective Harris stepped forward, clicking a button to start a slideshow. Images of newspaper clippings, police reports, and bank statements flashed on the screen. "Nick Harding isn't who he claims to be," I explained. "He's a con man who's been operating in towns across the country, swindling innocent people out of their hard-earned money." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nick jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You can't just make accusations like this without proof." Detective Harris stepped forward. "Oh, we have proof, Mr. Harding. Or should I say, Mr. Harper? Or maybe Mr. Daniels. You've gone by quite a few names, haven't you?" The detective began laying out the evidence, piece by damning piece. As he spoke, I watched the faces in the crowd. Shock gave way to anger, betrayal etched on every face. Rebecca Johnson, Laura's friend, stood up. "Is this true, Nick? Have you been lying to all of us?" Nick's composure cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. This is all a misunderstanding." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The crowd was turning against him, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. Franklin stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "Nick Harding, or whatever your real name is, I think it's time you left Maplewood. You're no longer welcome here." The crowd cheered, and Nick, realizing he was beaten, began to back away. But before he could flee, Sam Carter appeared, flanked by two other officers. "Not so fast, Nick," Sam said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement." As Nick was led away, the crowd's attention turned to me. I could see the questions in their eyes, the curiosity about how I had uncovered all of this. "Jimmy," someone called out, "how did you figure all this out?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the next part would be the hardest. "It all started with a note," I began. "A note warning me that someone close to me was hiding something." I saw Laura stiffen in her seat, her eyes wide with fear. That note led me to discover that Nick wasn't just conning the town, I continued. He was also having an affair with my wife, Laura. The gasps this time were even louder. All eyes turned to Laura, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her seat. Laura? Rebecca's voice was filled with disbelief. Is this true? Laura stood up slowly, her face pale. I didn't know about Nick's past. I swear, I had no idea he was conning anyone. But you knew you were cheating on Jimmy, Maggie spoke up, her voice hard. You knew you were betraying him and this whole town. The crowd's mood shifted again, this time turning against Laura. I watched as she faced the anger and disappointment of her friends and neighbors, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, with people shouting questions and accusations, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Franklin. You did the right thing, son, he said softly. It wasn't easy, but Maplewood deserved to know the truth. I nodded, watching as Laura fled from the square in tears. What happens now? I asked. Franklin sighed. Now, we rebuild, we heal, and we make sure nothing like this ever happens to our town again. As I looked out over the sea of familiar faces, now awash with a mix of emotions, I realized that this was just the beginning. Maplewood would never be the same again, and neither would I. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled and people lining the walls. I sat in the front row, Maggie on one side and Franklin on the other. Nick sat at the defendant's table, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous energy. As the bailiff called the court to order, I leaned over to Maggie. You sure this Mary Thompson is going to show? Maggie nodded. Detective Harris says she's eager to testify. Apparently, she's been waiting for a chance to take Nick down for years. The proceedings began, with the prosecutor laying out the case against Nick. I half listened, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. We'd kept Mary Thompson's involvement under wraps, hoping to catch Nick off guard. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A woman in her mid-30s strode in, her face set with determination. Nick's head whipped around, and I saw the color drain from his face. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, the state would like to call a surprise witness. Mary Thompson. Nick's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection. We weren't informed of this witness. The judge peered over his glasses. Overruled. But tread carefully, counselor. I'll be watching this closely. Mary took the stand, her eyes never leaving Nick's face. The prosecutor approached her. Miss Thompson, can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant? Mary's voice was clear and strong. I was Nick's partner, not just in business, but in crime. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Nick's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, I must object. This witness is admitting to criminal activity. The judge banged his gavel. Miss Thompson, are you aware that your testimony here today may be used against you in future proceedings? Mary nodded. I am, Your Honor, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of my actions. But the truth needs to come out. As Mary began to testify, I watched Nick's face. His cool facade crumbled as Mary laid bare their entire operation, detailing cons across multiple states, the women they'd swindled, the lives they'd ruined. Why did you decide to come forward now? The prosecutor asked. Mary's eyes flickered to me for a moment. Because someone finally stood up to Nick. Someone was brave enough to dig into his past and expose him for what he really is. I realized it was time to do the right thing, no matter the cost to myself. Nick's lawyer tried to discredit Mary on cross-examination, but her testimony was too detailed, too consistent to be shaken. As she stepped down from the stand, I saw Nick slump in his chair, defeat written across his face. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. As the foreman stood to read it, I felt Maggie squeeze my hand. We, the jury, find the defendant, Nicholas Harding, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was tempered by a strange emptiness. This victory felt hollow somehow. As Nick was led away in handcuffs, I turned to Franklin. It's over, I said. Franklin shook his head. Not quite, Jimmy. You still have one more thing to do. I nodded, knowing he was right. The truth about Nick was out, but Laura's betrayal was still hidden from most of the town. It was time to change that. The old Maplewood Theater hummed with excitement. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls, all here for what they thought was just a benefit concert. Little did they know, they were about to witness the final act in a drama that had consumed our town for months. I stood backstage, my guitar in hand, trying to calm my nerves. Maggie appeared at my side, concern etched on her face. "You sure about this, Jimmy?" she asked. "Once you do this, there's no going back." I nodded, my jaw set. "I'm sure. The truth needs to come out, all of it." As I stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers. I saw familiar faces everywhere, friends, neighbors, people I'd known my whole life. And there, in the third row, was Laura. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw fear flash across her face. I played through a few songs, the music washing over me, calming my nerves. But as the last notes of Maplewood Nights faded away, I knew it was time. "Folks," I said into the microphone, "I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. But there's another reason I asked you here. There's something you all need to know." The crowd quieted, curiosity replacing the excitement in their eyes. "You all know about Nick Harding, about the crimes he committed against our town. But there's more to the story. Nick wasn't acting alone." I saw Laura stiffen in her seat, her eyes wide with panic. For months, Nick was having an affair with someone in this town. Someone who betrayed not just me, but all of us. "That person is my wife, Laura." Gasps rippled through the audience. All eyes turned to Laura, who looked like she wanted to sink into her seat and disappear. "Laura," I said, my voice carrying through the stunned silence, "I think it's time you told everyone the truth." Laura stood slowly, her face pale. "Jimmy, please," she pleaded. "Don't do this." "Do what, Laura? Tell the truth? Isn't that what this town deserves?" She took a shaky breath. "Yes, it's true. I had an affair with Nick. I didn't know about his crimes, I swear. But I betrayed Jimmy, and I betrayed all of you. I'm so sorry." The theater erupted in a cacophony of voices. I saw shock, anger, and disappointment on the faces of our friends and neighbors. "I know this is a shock," I continued, raising my voice over the din. "Believe me, I was shocked too. But I think it's important that we all know the truth, that we understand how easily we can be deceived, even by those closest to us." Franklin stood up from his seat in the front row. "Jimmy's right," he said, his voice carrying authority even in this chaos. "We've all been betrayed, but now we have a choice. We can let this tear us apart, or we can come together, stronger than ever." As Franklin spoke, I saw something shift in the crowd. The anger began to subside, replaced by a sense of unity, of shared pain and shared strength. Laura, tears streaming down her face, began to make her way to the exit. As she passed by me, she paused. "I truly am sorry, Jimmy," she whispered. "For everything." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she left the theater, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out, for better or worse. The rest of the night passed in a blur. People came up to offer support, to share their own stories of betrayal and forgiveness. Through it all, I felt a sense of connection to this town stronger than I'd ever experienced before. As the crowd began to thin, Maggie approached me. "So, what now?" she asked. I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in months. "Now? Now we rebuild, we heal, and we make sure Maplewood comes out of this stronger than ever." I picked up my guitar and began to play, the familiar chords of Maplewood Heart filling the air. As I sang, I saw people begin to join in, their voices rising in harmony. In that moment, I knew that while the shadows of deceit had threatened to darken our town, the light of truth and community would always shine brighter. Maplewood had been tested, but we had emerged stronger, more united than ever before. As the last notes faded away, I looked out over the crowd, my friends, my neighbors, my family, and I knew, deep in my heart, that the best days of Maplewood were still to come. Weeks later, as I sat on my porch strumming my guitar, a familiar figure approached. It was Franklin, looking older and wearier than I'd ever seen him. "Jimmy," he said, settling into the chair beside me, "there's something I need to tell you." I set my guitar aside, sensing the weight of his words. "What is it, Franklin?" He took a deep breath. "That note, the one that started all of this, it was from me." I stared at him, stunned. "You? But why?" Franklin's eyes were filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "I'd seen the signs, Jimmy. I knew Laura was unhappy, knew she was slipping away. And when I saw her with Nick, I couldn't stand by and watch you be betrayed. You deserve to know the truth." I sat back, processing this revelation. After a moment, I reached out and clasped Franklin's shoulder. "Thank you," I said softly, "for having the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard." Franklin nodded, relief washing over his face. As we sat there in companionable silence, watching the sun set over Maplewood, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with friends like Franklin, with a community as strong as Maplewood, I knew we could face whatever challenges came our way. The shadows had been lifted, and a new day was dawning for all of us. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.